What if we told you that having ADHD could, like, actually shorten your lifespan?
Wow.
Yeah, pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But that's where our deep dive is taking us today.
Okay.
You've given us this amazing collection of research.
Mm-hmm.
It spans, like, decades, right?
Yeah.
Of breakthroughs in ADHD research and, honestly, some pretty unsettling discoveries.
Right.
We're going to go on this journey through all these pivotal studies starting way back in the 1960s.
Okay.
And we'll trace how our understanding of this, like, really complex condition has evolved over time.
Cool.
So buckle up, because we're about to uncover not just, like, the science, but the shocking realities of ADHD's impact,
Okay.
including that mortality gap that was found in a recent British study
Right.
that was really kind of shook things up.
Yeah, it's a story that definitely challenges a lot of those old assumptions about ADHD for sure.
Yeah.
What was once just dismissed as, kids just being fidgety or inattentive
Yeah.
is now understood to have like these deep roots in, neurobiology and genetics.
Right.
And those findings, well, they go way beyond just managing symptoms, that's for sure.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock, like way back to the 1960s.
Right.
Imagine you're a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And your child is constantly getting in trouble at school
Right.
for, not sitting still, disrupting the class,
Yeah.
just not being able to focus.
Yeah.
Back then, people just thought, well, that kid just needs more discipline.
Right.
But researchers like Chess and Thomas, they were starting to look at things a little differently.
Yeah, that's right.
They were studying temperament in children.
Yeah.
And their work was really kind of laying the groundwork for how we understand ADHD today, right?
Totally.
So what were they finding?
Well, they found that for some kids, those high activity levels
Yeah.
and having a hard time controlling their attention.
Right.
It wasn't just a matter of, willpower or bad behavior,
Right.
These could actually be like inborn traits.
Oh, wow.
Part of a child's temperament, basically.
Okay.
Like something they were essentially wired with.
So it wasn't just about being a, quote, bad kid.
Exactly.
It was about their brain being wired differently.
Right?
And they came up with this term, goodness of fit, right?
Yes.
It's so interesting.
It is. It is.
Can you explain that a little?
Yeah, so think of it like this.
Okay.
Some people just thrive in like a really busy and chaotic environment,
Right.
while others really need, quiet and structure
Yeah.
to do their best.
The focus.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's the same for kids with ADHD,
Okay.
Their environment needs to like match their needs.
Gotcha.
If you put a highly active, easily distractible kid in a structured, rigid setting, it's like almost setting them up to fail.
Right.
But if you give that same kid an environment with outlets for their energy and, flexibility in how they learn, then they can thrive.
That's a really helpful way to think about it.
Yeah.
So the 1960s was all about starting to recognize that some kids might just be wired differently.
Right.
But then things really took like a big leap forward in the 1970s
Okay.
with researchers really diving into, what was then called hyperkinetic reaction of childhood.
Right.
And we meet Paul Wender,
Yes.
who did these like large-scale trials using stimulant medications like methylphenidate,
Yeah.
which we know is Ritalin.
Exactly.
That must have been so controversial back then.
Right.
Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
the idea of giving kids medication for what was still seen by many as just a behavioral problem.
Right.
It's like, just give them medicine.
Yeah. A lot of people were really concerned about over-medicating children.
Yeah.
And those concerns were totally valid, But Wender's research, it provided like crucial evidence that these medications could actually be effective
Oh, wow.
in reducing those core ADHD symptoms.
Okay.
But he also issued a really critical warning, didn't he?
He did, yeah. What was that?
He cautioned against relying solely on medication.
Okay.
Like it wasn't just about, popping a pill and calling it a day.
Right.
He emphasized the importance of psychosocial support.
So things like therapy.
Yeah. Therapy, educational interventions, things like that.
Okay.
He was like really ahead of his time
Yeah.
in recognizing that ADHD wasn't just about symptoms.
Right.
It was about supporting the whole child.
And then came Virginia Douglas,
Oh, yeah.
who made a truly groundbreaking discovery.
Yes.
Up until that point, attention deficits and hyperactivity, they were kind of like lumped together, weren't they? Seen as two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, yeah.
But Douglas separated them out.
She did.
This is where it gets interesting.
Yes.
She noticed that even when those hyperactive kids, were physically restricted, like kept from moving around, they still struggled with mental focus.
That's right.
Their minds were still racing.
Yeah.
They still couldn't concentrate.
Right.
It's like their bodies were still, but their minds were going a mile a minute.
Yeah.
That was a huge revelation, wasn't it?
It really was.
It was a total game changer.
Yeah.
Her work showed that attention, not just physical restlessness, was the core issue. It was like a key that unlocked this whole new level of understanding about ADHD.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so the 1970s gave us this much deeper understanding of the role of attention. But ADHD, or ADD as it was called then, still hadn't gained widespread acceptance as like a legitimate medical condition.
Yeah.
A lot of people still saw it as just an excuse for bad behavior.
Right.
But in the 1980s, there was a landmark study that would challenge that perception.
Yeah, there was.
I'm talking about Michael Rutter's Isle of Wight study.
Huh?
This was a large-scale, very meticulously designed study.
Right.
And it like blew the lid off some of those myths surrounding ADD.
Yeah.
What were they finding?
Well, back then, most people thought that ADHD was the result of like bad parenting,
Yeah.
a lack of discipline or some other environmental factor.
Right.
But Rutter's research really turned that on its head.
Yeah?
They found really clear evidence for a biological predisposition to ADHD.
Wow.
Meaning like some kids were simply more likely to develop these challenges
Okay.
because of their genes.
So it wasn't just a matter of kids needing like stricter parents
Right, exactly.
or better teachers, It was literally written into their biology.
It was.
Must have been such a relief for a lot of parents
I'm sure.
who are constantly being blamed for their child's struggles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a validation, not just for the parents, but for like the entire field of ADHD research.
Yeah.
It helped legitimize ADHD as like a real diagnosable condition
Right.
with a biological basis.
But the picture wasn't complete yet, though, was it?
He wasn't, no.
So around the same time, Dennis Cantwell was making some groundbreaking discoveries about something called comorbidity.
Right.
Now, comorbidity is just a fancy way of saying that someone has more than one condition at the same time, right?
Right.
And what Cantwell found
Yeah.
was that kids with ADHD often had other co-occurring conditions.
That's right. Yeah.
So they might have anxiety?
Yeah, anxiety, depression, learning disabilities, or even like oppositional defiant disorder.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it really added another layer of complexity to ADHD.
Yeah.
It showed that it was rarely like a standalone issue. It was often like intertwined with these other challenges, which, made treatment even more complicated. You couldn't just like address the ADHD symptoms and ignore everything else.
Right.
It required a much more like holistic and multidisciplinary approach.
So the 1980s really brought home that biological basis of ADHD and the complexity of its presentation.
Right.
But as we move into the 1990s, the focus shifts to treatment.
Okay.
And this is where the landmark MTA study or the multimodal treatment study of ADHD really like shook things up.
Yeah, the MTA study was huge. It was designed to like compare different treatment approaches for ADHD. And the findings were really groundbreaking. They're still transforming how we approach treatment today.
What did they find?
So they found that the most effective treatment wasn't medication alone or behavioral therapy alone, but a combination of both.
Oh, wow.
This was a huge shift away from that like one-size-fits-all mentality that had been around for so long.
Yeah.
So
can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
What were the specific findings?
Okay, so the study looked at 4 different treatment groups. So there was medication management alone, behavioral therapy alone,
Gotcha.
a combination of medication and behavioral therapy, and then a community care control group.
So what was that?
Basically, that meant that those kids received whatever treatment was typically available in their community.
Okay.
Whatever they would have gotten anyway.
Gotcha.
And the kids who received the combination of medication and behavioral therapy, they showed the most improvement.
Right.
the greatest reductions in ADHD symptoms.
Wow.
Better social skills, and even improved academic performance.
That's amazing.
And the benefits weren't just like limited to the kids themselves either.
Oh, wow.
Parents and teachers. They also reported significant improvements in the kids' behavior and overall functioning.
So it wasn't just about reducing symptoms. No. It was about improving quality of life.
Exactly.
For the child, for their families, for their teachers, everyone. Wow.
It really was a landmark study.
Yeah.
And it, started a whole new era of individualized treatment for ADHD.
Okay.
It showed that a tailored approach, combining medication and behavioral therapy, could have like these profound and lasting benefits.
But the 1990s wasn't just about treatment breakthroughs.
Right.
This is also where Russell Barkley's work
Oh, yeah.
on executive function deficits really changed how we thought about, what was going on inside the ADHD brain.
Yeah.
Now, this is a little technical, so let's break it down for our listeners.
Okay.
So executive functions are basically the mental processes that allow us to plan, right?
Right.
Organize, regulate our emotions, and control our impulses.
Yeah.
Like the control panel of the brain.
I think it's a great analogy.
And Barkley argued that a deficiency in executive function was like at the very core of ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just about being hyperactive or inattentive.
Yeah.
It was about having trouble with these really fundamental mental processes that like govern our behavior.
Yeah, totally.
So think about things like time management.
Okay.
Planning, following through on tasks, controlling your emotions, resisting impulses. If your executive functions aren't working properly, all of these things become way harder.
Yeah, it's like trying to drive a car with a faulty steering wheel.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not working right.
And Barkley's theory, it helped explain why a lot of people with ADHD, they struggled with things like oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder.
Right.
If you have trouble controlling your impulses and regulating your emotions, you're more likely to have behavioral problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
His work really shifted our focus.
It did.
From those outward behaviors to the internal struggles that were like driving them.
Right.
And that shift had big implications for treatment, didn't it?
It did.
Were some of those?
Well, it meant that, treatment couldn't just focus on managing those outward symptoms.
Okay.
It had to address, like, those underlying executive function deficits.
Gotcha.
So this led to, the development of therapies specifically designed to strengthen those executive function skills.
Okay.
Things like, working memory training, organizational coaching, and even emotional regulation techniques.
So the 1990s brought us some really critical breakthroughs in both our understanding and treatment of ADHD.
Yeah, for sure.
But the story doesn't end there.
No, it doesn't.
In the 2000s, we see a growing awareness of adult ADHD.
Right.
And research starts to explore some of those long-term consequences of the condition.
Right.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, we'll be right back.
Welcome back to our deep dive into ADHD through the decades.
Yeah.
We've traveled all the way from those early kind of, whispers of understanding in the 1960s to, groundbreaking discoveries about attention and biology in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
And then to those, like, game-changing treatment approaches of the 90s.
Yeah.
But for a long time, the conversation around ADHD was very much focused on, children.
Right.
And there was this prevailing belief that that kids just grew out of it, right?
Yeah. For years, ADHD was just seen as this, childhood condition, something that you dealt with when you were younger.
Yeah.
And then you just magically outgrow it as you matured.
Right.
But that assumption would be challenged in a big way.
It's almost as if we just kind of forgot about those kids as they became adults.
Yeah. Right.
Out of mind.
Yeah.
But they didn't just disappear.
No.
They grew up.
You're right.
They became adults.
Often still dealing with those same ADHD challenges.
Yeah.
Only now they're, navigating all these new complexities.
Right. Careers, relationships, financial responsibilities, just life,
It's a lot to handle.
Yeah.
Even without ADHD in the mix.
Totally.
And in the 2000s, a researcher named Joseph Biederman, he really kind of blew the lid off this whole kids grow out of it myth.
Yeah, he did.
His research showed that ADHD wasn't a phase. It was, a lifelong condition that persisted into adulthood.
Right.
Often with, even greater consequences.
Yeah, his work was huge.
So what was he finding?
He followed those kids that we thought had, outgrown ADHD.
Okay.
And he found that a lot of them were still experiencing those core symptoms.
Like the inattention.
Yeah, inattention, impulsivity.
Right.
Difficulty with executive function.
Okay.
Only now it was, affecting their adult lives.
So those kids who couldn't sit still in class.
Maybe now they're adults who are struggling to focus at work, missing deadlines.
Right.
Having trouble managing their finances.
Yeah, or even maintaining stable relationships.
It's kind of heartbreaking to think about.
It is.
All those people, navigating life with this undiagnosed.
Right.
And therefore untreated condition.
Right, exactly.
That could be managed.
Yeah, potentially.
With the right support.
The tragedy is, a lot of these adults, they had no idea why they were struggling.
Right.
Yeah. They spent their whole lives feeling like they were somehow flawed.
Right, like they weren't trying hard enough.
Exactly, but it wasn't a lack of effort. It was ADHD.
So the 2000s, it really brought this issue of adult ADHD to the forefront.
It did.
But what about the causes of ADHD?
Right.
Was it still seen as like a product of the environment?
Yeah.
Or were researchers starting to, look deeper into those biological underpinnings?
Right. Yeah, so this is where the International Multi-Center ADHD Genetics Project, or IMAGE, comes in.
Okay.
It was this huge collaborative effort with researchers from all over the world.
Wow.
They were pooling their data and their expertise to finally unravel the genetic mysteries of ADHD.
And their findings were groundbreaking, right?
They were.
I remember reading about this research and feeling like we'd finally crossed, a major threshold in our understanding.
It was a big deal.
So what did they discover?
Well, by analyzing DNA from families with ADHD, they found that the condition is highly heritable. Meaning that genes play a huge role in determining whether or not someone is likely to develop ADHD. Okay. And this wasn't just one or two genes.
Right.
They found multiple genes involved.
Oh, wow.
Each one contributing a small piece to the puzzle.
So this wasn't just about environment anymore. It was literally woven into the fabric of a person's DNA.
Yeah.
That must have been so validating.
For sure.
For all those people who had been blamed for their ADHD, told that it was just bad parenting or, a lack of discipline.
Right.
And now we have this, scientific proof that it wasn't their fault.
It wasn't their fault. It was their genes.
It's like their genes load the gun.
Yeah.
But it's the environment that pulls the trigger.
Right.
Did IMAGE find that environment still played a role?
Oh, absolutely, for sure.
Right.
Even with a strong genetic predisposition, a supportive environment can make a huge difference.
Really?
Yeah.
So what kind of things?
So things like consistent parenting, a positive school environment, and access to early intervention.
Right.
These can all significantly reduce the negative outcomes associated with ADHD.
So it's not deterministic.
No.
Just because you have the genes, it doesn't mean you're doomed to struggle.
Right, exactly.
With the right kind of support, people with ADHD can absolutely thrive.
Totally.
But as we move into the 2010s, the research takes kind of a somber turn.
Yeah, it does.
The focus shifts from causes and treatments to those long-term consequences of ADHD.
Right.
And what researchers discover is, it's deeply concerning.
Yeah.
A meta-analysis was published in JAMA Pediatrics.
Okay.
Which is, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world.
Right.
And they revealed a shocking statistic.
Yeah.
People with ADHD were dying earlier than their peers.
Wow.
Often from preventable causes like accidents or suicide.
That's a big deal.
It was a real wake-up call.
Yeah.
It reframed ADHD as more than just a learning or behavioral challenge.
Yeah.
It was a serious public health issue with the potential to, really cut life short. We often think about ADHD in terms of its impact on, school or work or relationships.
Right.
But the idea that it could actually affect lifespan, that's a whole other level of seriousness.
Totally.
So what were some of the factors contributing to increased mortality risk?
Well, impulsivity, which is, like a hallmark of ADHD, it plays a big role.
Okay.
It can lead to risky behaviors like reckless driving, substance abuse, even like engaging in dangerous activities without thinking about the consequences.
Wow.
And then there's also, a higher prevalence of mental health issues like depression and anxiety among people with ADHD, which can increase the risk of suicide.
Right.
And then there's, the physical health risks too.
Okay.
People with ADHD, they're more likely to have sleep problems, which can, lead to a bunch of other health issues. They're also more likely to have unhealthy eating habits and to be like less physically active.
So it's not just one thing.
No.
It's this like complex interplay of factors, both biological and environmental.
Right.
That contribute to this increased risk.
Yeah, it's like this perfect storm of vulnerabilities.
Right.
And the results are pretty scary.
Yeah.
But, it wasn't all doom and gloom in the 2010s. There were some really important steps made in understanding the global burden of ADHD.
Okay, cool.
Stephen Farallon's research was like really influential in this area.
What did he find?
Well, his work showed that ADHD wasn't just a quote-unquote Western problem.
Right.
Something limited to developed countries with like fast-paced lifestyles.
Right.
He showed that ADHD is a global thing affecting people from all walks of life.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a really important point because it highlights like the universality of this condition, right? It's not just a product of modern society or, specific cultural norms.
Right.
It's something that affects people all over the globe.
Yeah.
And that means that we need like a global response.
We do.
We can't just focus on addressing ADHD like in certain parts of the world and ignoring it in others.
Right. Exactly.
It's like a shared challenge.
Yes.
That requires a shared solution.
A shared solution, yeah.
Now, as we enter the 2020s, we see this like surge in ADHD diagnoses.
Right.
Particularly among women.
Yeah.
And people of color.
Yes.
So what's driving this trend?
Right.
Is it just that we're getting better at, recognizing ADHD? Or are there other things going on?
I think it's definitely a combination of factors.
Okay.
We are getting better at identifying ADHD, but for a long time, our diagnostic criteria, they were mainly based on observations of boys.
Really?
Which meant that girls who often present with like inattentive symptoms rather than like hyperactive symptoms, they were overlooked a lot.
So they were like the quiet kids in the back of the class.
Exactly.
Daydreaming, struggling to stay organized.
Yeah, but not necessarily like causing disruptions.
Right. They weren't that classic ADHD kid.
Right.
So they were slipping through the cracks.
They were.
Not because they weren't struggling,
right,
but because their struggles looked different.
Exactly.
And what about people of color?
Right.
What were some of the barriers to diagnosis in those communities?
So for people of color, there's this, added layer of systemic racism.
Right.
And bias within the healthcare system.
Yeah.
And studies have shown that Black and brown children are less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than white children.
Wow.
Even when they have similar symptoms.
That's crazy.
And they're more likely to be labeled as like disruptive or defiant.
Right.
And their struggles are often, attributed to environmental factors rather than biological ones.
So it's like a double whammy of misperceptions.
Yeah.
And it's had these like devastating consequences.
It has, but thankfully awareness is growing.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see a push for, more equitable diagnosis and treatment.
Okay.
The work of Margaret Sibley has been really important in this area.
Yeah, she's done a lot of work on women with ADHD, hasn't she?
She has, yeah.
What has she found?
Well, she's found that those traditional diagnostic criteria, they often miss the mark when it comes to girls and women. Their ADHD, it often manifests like more subtly, with less outward hyperactivity, and more internal restlessness, anxiety, and trouble regulating emotions.
So because they weren't getting diagnosed.
Right.
They weren't getting the support they needed.
Exactly.
And they were often just left to like cope on their own.
Yeah.
Right.
Developing those compensatory strategies like, perfectionism or people pleasing, which could, mask the ADHD.
Yeah.
But it didn't address the root of the problem.
It's like you were trying to fit, a square peg into a round hole,
Yeah.
constantly trying to, like, force themselves to conform to a system that just wasn't designed for their brains.
Yeah, and it took a toll, for sure.
It did, yeah.
A lot of women with undiagnosed ADHD, they struggled with low self-esteem, feeling like they were constantly failing to meet expectations.
Yeah.
They experienced anxiety, depression, and even relationship problems.
Wow.
And they often felt like they were just bad at life,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Like they weren't trying hard enough.
Yeah.
But again, it wasn't a lack of effort. It was ADHD.
It's heartbreaking to think about.
It is.
All that wasted potential, all those years of, like, unnecessary suffering.
Yeah.
Just because, we didn't have the right diagnostic tools or the awareness to recognize that ADHD could, like, look different in different people.
Yeah.
And then just when we thought we were starting to, get a handle on this, a new study comes out and it just, like, sends shockwaves through the ADHD community.
Right.
I'm talking about that massive British study on ADHD and mortality that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
What were the findings?
Okay, so this study, it was published just this year, and it analyzed data from over 5 million people in the UK.
Wow.
Making it one of the largest studies on ADHD and mortality to date.
Okay.
And the results were even more alarming than previous research had suggested.
Oh, wow.
They found that men with ADHD were dying an average of 7 years earlier than their peers.
Okay.
And women were dying 9 years earlier.
9 years.
Yeah, 9 years.
It's a huge difference.
It's huge.
It's a wake-up call, right? It's a stark reminder that ADHD is not something to be taken lightly.
No.
It can have a profound impact on a person's life, even like their lifespan.
Absolutely.
Those numbers are, they're just devastating.
They are.
It's like a gut punch.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider that, so many of these deaths are preventable.
Right.
If we know the risks, if we have treatments that can help, why are we still seeing, these kinds of outcomes?
It's complicated.
Yeah.
There are these like systemic barriers to accessing, good quality care.
Right.
There's the stigma around mental health.
Yeah.
And just a general lack of awareness about the long-term risks of ADHD.
We need to do better.
We do.
We need to be more proactive in screening for ADHD,
Right.
especially in those groups, that have been historically underdiagnosed.
Yeah.
We need to ensure access to comprehensive individualized treatment.
Right. And not just medication, but also like therapy, coaching, educational support.
Right.
We need to address those like broader social determinants of health that contribute to these alarming mortality statistics.
So things like poverty?
Yeah, poverty, lack of access to healthcare, systemic racism, they all play a role.
And we need to talk about stigma.
We do.
There's still so much like shame and misunderstanding surrounding ADHD.
Totally.
We need to normalize conversations about mental health, challenge harmful stereotypes, and celebrate those unique strengths and perspectives that people with ADHD bring to the table.
Totally.
This deep dive has been like a roller coaster of emotions, hasn't it?
It has.
We've gone from those like early glimmers of hope to moments of like profound heartbreak.
Yeah.
We've seen how far we've come in, understanding this complex condition.
Right.
But we've also been confronted with those harsh realities of its impact.
Yeah.
And as we stand here on the edge of this new era in ADHD research and treatment, with all these advancements in genetics, neuroimaging, and digital technologies, we have a choice to make.
We do.
Do we continue down the same path?
Yeah.
Accepting those, alarming mortality statistics?
Right.
And perpetuating that stigma?
Yeah.
Or do we choose a different path, a path of, like, understanding, acceptance, and action?
I think we're at a tipping point.
Yeah.
Awareness is growing, stigma is receding, and the call for change is getting louder.
Yeah, for sure.
This deep dive has definitely sparked a fire in me.
Yeah.
And I hope it's done the same for everyone listening.
Wow, we've covered a lot in our deep dive into ADHD, haven't we?
We have.
From those early temperament studies to that, shocking mortality data.
Right.
It's clear that ADHD is like this multifaceted and complex condition, right?
It is.
that demands our attention and our action.
For sure.
But where do we go from here?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Knowing what we know now, what can we actually do to, like, change those learning statistics?
Right.
And create a more supportive world for people with ADHD.
Well, I think, we got to translate all this knowledge, all this research into real-world action.
Okay.
And it starts with awareness, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
We've got to make sure that everyone, parents, teachers, doctors, they all understand ADHD, right? The diverse ways it can look.
Right.
Especially in those groups that have been, like, historically underdiagnosed.
Right. Those that have been overlooked and, misdiagnosed.
Exactly.
It's almost like we need to be ADHD detectives.
Right.
Looking for those clues.
Yeah.
And being really attuned to, like, those subtle presentations.
Right.
Because if we're just looking for those, stereotypical hyperactive kids, we're going to miss a lot of people.
We are.
Who are quietly struggling.
Totally.
Think about, like, those quiet girls in the back of the class. Or the kids who are labeled as, lazy or unmotivated.
Right.
When really they're, like, grappling with executive function challenges.
Exactly, yeah.
We need to be more, I guess, sensitive to those nuances.
Yeah.
More willing to, like, consider ADHD as a possibility.
Yeah.
Even when it doesn't fit that classic mold.
Totally.
And early identification, that's key, right?
It is, yeah.
The earlier we can get kids diagnosed.
Yeah.
And the earlier we can get them, the right kind of support, the better their chances of, thriving.
It's like building a bridge, isn't it?
Okay.
If we can build that bridge between early identification and effective intervention, then we can really change the trajectory of their lives.
But it's not just about, catching those obvious cases.
Right.
It's about creating a system where everyone, no matter their background or their, symptoms, has access to quality assessment and support.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't have a system where only those with, like, the most severe symptoms or those with the resources to, advocate for themselves are the ones getting help.
Right, exactly.
We need universal screening programs.
Yes.
More training for, like, educators and healthcare providers.
Right.
And better access to affordable, evidence-based treatment options.
I agree.
And that treatment, it has to be comprehensive, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
It can't just be about medication.
Right.
Medication can be, like, a lifeline for many people.
Yeah.
But it's not a magic bullet.
No, definitely not.
We need a multifaceted approach that addresses, the whole person.
Right.
So therapy.
Yeah, therapy, coaching, educational support, lifestyle modifications, all those things.
They're all, like, pieces of the puzzle.
They are.
It's about, empowering people with ADHD with the tools and strategies they need to, like, manage their challenges.
Yeah.
And use their strengths.
Right.
And it's not just about the individuals and themselves either, right?
No, it's not.
It's about creating supportive environments.
Totally.
We can't just put all the responsibility on the individual with ADHD to, like, adapt and overcome.
We need to create systems that are more accommodating, more flexible, more understanding.
Yeah, I like that.
So, like, imagine workplaces that offer, accommodations, like flexible scheduling or noise-canceling headphones.
Right.
Or schools that have sensory-friendly classrooms and individualized learning plans.
Okay.
And healthcare systems that provide longer appointment times so doctors can actually sit down, really listen, and understand their patients' needs.
Those are all things within our reach.
I think so, too.
It sounds kind of like a utopia, but it's not, like, unattainable, is it?
No, it's not.
We have the knowledge, we have the tools.
We do.
And I truly believe that we have the collective will to create a more inclusive and supportive world for people with ADHD.
I agree.
It's about recognizing that neurodiversity is a gift, not a deficit.
Absolutely.
It's about embracing difference.
Yeah.
Challenging those old, outdated notions of, like, what normal is.
Right.
And creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive no matter how their brain is wired.
And that starts with, each and every one of us.
Yeah.
We all have a role to play in creating this more inclusive future.
Okay, so what can we do?
Well, educate yourself about ADHD, challenge stigma when you see it,
Right.
advocate for change in your communities,
Okay.
and support organizations that are doing great work in this space.
Knowledge is power, right?
It is.
The more we understand about ADHD, the better equipped we'll be to, create a world where those alarming mortality statistics become a relic of the past.
Exactly.
A reminder of a time when we didn't know better.
Right.
Let's make sure those numbers don't define our future.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's choose a different path. A path of hope, empowerment, and possibility.
Beautifully said.
And remember, even small actions can have, like, a ripple effect, can't they?
They can.
A conversation, a shared article, a donation to, a good cause. Every little bit helps.
It does.
If this deep dive has inspired you, if it's, sparked your curiosity or desire to, like, learn more.
Right.
Embrace it.
Yeah.
Dive deeper into the research. Connect with organizations doing great work in the ADHD community.
Right.
Share what you've learned with others.
Let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Let's keep learning, keep advocating, keep pushing for change.
Until next time, keep diving deep.